Hello, my name is Wells Waite, and just like you, I'm a member of a species who has taken over the world, not through power of our muscles, but through the power of our minds. But despite the fact that our minds have allowed us to see the patterns of the world and overcome almost any challenge, we learn in the same way as animals and even artificial intelligence. And we learn through something called the cost function. There's other names, such as the loss function, the error function, and the reward function. And all of these basically represent the desire to repeat an action. We learn because we either want to do something again because we get a reward, such as coming to a presentation and getting cookies, or we try to avoid an action that results in some negative thing, like when you're trying to rock around a table and you keep running into the same table leg. You're going to try to avoid that the next go around. Now, this desire to repeat, those terms are basically functions that allow us to mathematically find that. But humans also use this same kind of idea. For us, we're kind of the hardest to see this because we think so far into the future. I mean, I'm willing to put up with homework even if I find it as a pain, but I'm still willing to do it because I see far enough into the future that I want to get to college, and then I want to get a job, and then eventually I'll get the reward of money. I'm willing to wait a long time for that. Now, humans, we use long-term memory and stuff. Animals, they're all in the present. For animals, theirs is all based on instincts. They don't have this long-term thought, they're not sapient, and so it's very down to their instincts. So it works great for training animals, same for AI. For animals like canines, food is kind of the biggest motivator. They can get water, they can sleep, they're kind of the apex predators, they're not afraid. So food is the one thing that they have their biggest drive, because food runs away, it's the hardest to get. So when we're training animals, especially dogs and cats, we use food. This is associating a reward with specific actions, such as sitting when you give it a command or staying put. And so we're starting to tell it that our commands give it food, so it no longer needs to hunt. We're just kind of filling that niche. Now, artificial intelligence is completely artificial, so there is no base instincts for survival. There is no long-term thinking unless we tell it to have that. And so all those functions are mathematical equations that allow us to basically tell the AI if it's doing something we want, something we don't want, or just some other things like patterns that it should be looking for. Now, since it's artificial, we have to build math for this, and there's kind of like three main categories of how we handle the loss function to try to duplicate the learning process, and that's supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning. Humans is down to the base instincts, but we can use these three categories to kind of mimic different learning styles of humans. Supervised learning is kind of like a math classroom, where the teacher's going to give you a problem, and you're going to work out to some kind of solution. If this solution is correct, and the teacher knows it's correct, they're going to reward you. Whereas if it's incorrect, they're going to basically say it's wrong, and you're going to learn the pattern through the teacher telling you what's right and what's wrong. The teacher in this case knows what's correct and wrong during the training process, during schooling, and when we go off into the field, we're not going to know what the correct solution is, but through all this being given the correct answer, we're going to be able to see the patterns that make up the process to get to the correct answer. This is the most simple type of learning because we just give it a whole bunch of data that we know, so maybe like biology data. Maybe you have water samples with different different cells that are either good for humans or bad for humans. We want to classify it. We'll give them a whole bunch of water samples that we've used a microscope and stuff to check. And then we'll tell it what's good bacteria, what's bad bacteria, and then we'll give it a completely new water sample without it, and it'll be able to predict it. Unsupervised learning is the next category, and this is kind of like a classroom without the teacher. You're never gonna get what's known as the correct answer because there isn't necessarily a correct answer because the teacher isn't there. So this is often used for kind of more the art side, so music classification is a common one. If you give one of these models during the training set a whole bunch of different type of songs, it's going to classify them by some metric. But as in music, there's no necessarily right or wrong answer if it's good or bad. This is going to be looking for patterns that really could be anything. So this one's a little harder to work with just because this classification could be volume, it could be the first note, it could be sound waves, and there's no real way of knowing, but we do know it classified it. So there's some pattern connecting them. This one's pretty hard to work with. I don't use it. I don't really see too much of a use for this one, but reinforcement learning is kind of the big point that I want to talk about, and the whole reason why I gave those other ones, because this is how humans learn. Humans learn from our environment. Taking a step forward, which is an action or an output from us, doesn't necessarily give us a reward or like a negative penalty. but reaching maybe food or something else does give us a reward. So a mouse in a maze is a pretty common example. The mouse moving around the maze doesn't give it a reward or penalty. So it's not its actions that are giving it rewards and penalties. It's the environment, such as when the mouse walks into a maze wall or makes it to the cheese. It's the environment itself that's rewarding it. So for a dog training, the human is basically its environment in a sense, because we're the ones in charge of rewarding it based on certain actions. And that's how humans learn. So how close is artificial intelligence to actually reaching the human potential? And this is a really hard thing to talk about because it's pretty complex. But we're going to talk today about general intelligence, which is the idea that humans can apply and learn many different skill sets. We don't just learn how to speak. We also learn how to walk, learn to do math and skateboard. Well, some of us can. I can't. But the general idea is that we can do many different tasks, and the skills we learn in one can be applied to another. And that is what general intelligence is. No other animal has what is called general intelligence. There are some that are close, some that are pretty far away, that are just basically pure instinct. But this is kind of what we're aiming for in artificial intelligence with these larger models. Now, how close are we? Well, we're going to talk about this in scale, but to understand the scale, we have to first understand kind of what's happening in the human brain and the artificial networks. Both human and these artificial brains basically operate in an identical manner using a neural network. The neural network is comprised of connections and neurons. The connections just transfer data between neurons, and the neurons take this data and basically summarize it all up into one output. So they can have as many inputs as you want. Biologically speaking, there's definitely a limit, but mathematically, you can have as many neuron inputs as you want. And the neuron's job is to figure out if they're important, not important, and then kind of summarize all that information into one output that it can send out to the rest of the neurons in the brain. Now, this might not make sense right now. I have an example in a few more slides when I talk about scale that will help clarify this a little bit. It's pretty abstract when you're just looking at a screen of dots and lines. So, to put it into the human mind scale, the human mind has 86 billion neurons. Big number. It's kind of hard to visualize that also, so we're going to do some quick rounding. We're just going to say 100 billion neurons, so I can throw this into a real-world example. The human mind has 100 trillion connections. So 100 times that, 1,000 times that, 1,000. Yeah. Which would mean, on average, every single neuron in the human brain has 1,000 inputs into it, roughly speaking. So that's a small number compared to all those rest. But when we take it into the scale of the human world and try to make the humans in our environment act as the neurons, we can kind of start seeing how they interact. With 8 billion people in the world, well, the math is hard, so let's just say 10 billion for this example. And let's say each one of these 10 billion people has a phone. If all these people have a phone, each phone would have to represent 10 different neurons in the human brain. And to make this easy, let's say each neuron is a group chat. So you have a phone, everyone in the world does, with 10 group chats on it. Each group chat would have, on average, 1,000 people in it. It's quite a bit. And the neuron's job, which is you in this case, is to read every 1,000 messages. So like, you have to read every message from all these people and summarize it all into one output and send that in that same group chat. Now, you have to do this in 2 milliseconds, because that's how long the average neuron takes to fire. And you have 10 group chats to do. So that's reading, 10,000 different messages and summarizing that. And it's not just you doing that, it's everyone in the world, plus just an extra 2 billion people because we made the math easier. That is a massive brain. So, how close are we? Well, again, this is really hard to talk about because there are so many different aspects. We're going to talk about it in the case of size for this presentation, just because we have numbers for that, whereas the structures and complexity of the connections is very hard to model. And we're going to be looking at ChatGPT 3 to compare them, because there's a decent amount of information known. ChatGPT 4 is pretty closed doors, you can't get access to it. But, maybe next slide.
Click it on the arrow.
There we go. Okay. There are around 175 billion parameters in ChatGPT 3. Now, we haven't talked about parameters, and so we can basically just say they're connections. So 200 billion connections in ChatGPT 3. And this model can basically mimic human language. It's pretty good at that. Now, if we compare this to the number of connections in the human mind, there's only 0.2% of the connections. That's less than 0.5%. Now, that's not the whole story. The human mind is kind of randomly mutated, so, how really good is it? We don't really know. But if everything works out, we just have to, increase our neural networks a lot to be able to reach there. To put this kind of 0.2% into perspective, it's estimated that it took 34 days to train ChatGPT 3. Now, this is using buildings full of computers that are specifically designed and built just to train artificial intelligence models. And if we were to extend this to the same number of connections of the human mind, it would take 46.6 years, almost half a century to train it. Now, that's a pretty long time. Now, it is in most of the students' at least lifespan, but like, who's going to wait that long? Now, we could wait that long, and we could potentially get something that's closer to the human mind, general intelligence. So I would say general intelligence is possible because of this. Now, that's with no improvements at all. So, is there some way that we can reach there faster? What kind of improvements can we make to artificial intelligence to get us to general intelligence, or at least to a mind that is capable of doing more than just spitting out the next word that's most likely to be in that sentence, which is how ChatGPT 3 works. Now, there are three main methods that computer scientists and just people who work with neural networks use to try to improve the operation speed and how big these neural networks can be. The first one is computers. Just throw money at the problem. Get more computers, make them work faster, but this is limited. Right now we're at 3 nanometers, I think, technology, but we can't get computers that operate on any smaller scale. So the only option now for computers is getting them bigger. Or, quantum computers or computers that operate on light, but we're not there yet. The second method of improving neural networks is just making the software more efficient. It doesn't actually work that well. Yes, we can train, but it takes a really long time compared to what humans take to learn, and it's just not very efficient right now, and that's kind of the easiest spot to do research, because we can just keep working on the math and keep trying new things. Whereas the last one is very inconsistent. It's just coming up with some completely new idea out of the blue that just makes everything work out. This is actually what allowed ChatGPT 3 and all the language models to work. So it is definitely possible. They decided words are the same things as vectors. And sure enough, we can now make artificial intelligence model understand language. So I guess words are somehow related to vectors. I'm not that sure on that part. But to kind of end this presentation, I want to talk about one of many potential methods of improving the software efficiency, as this is really where my research actually started for my thesis. And that is neuron specialization. It's basically the idea that our human mind has different regions in it that are each specialized for different things. We have regions for visual processing, auditory processing, some people have emotional processing. No, but most. Now, I don't know how many regions there are. I do know there are 3,000 different unique types of neurons in the brain. 3 main categories, but 3,000 different types. Now, these 3,000 different types basically mean that different regions of the brain can process different information more efficiently. They can learn the patterns differently. Say sound. The part of my brain that's in charge of processing sound, it can understand it. But as soon as I try to use the part of my brain and I look at like a spectrograph or something of sound, I have no clue what I'm looking at anymore. It's this idea that some parts of the brain are specialized in different things. Now, with 3,000 types of neurons, this doesn't seem like too many. But artificial networks only have 2, maybe 3 types of neurons. ChatGPT 3 maybe had 4, I don't know. But we do not use very many. And there's no good reason for this. My research showed that neuron specialization in artificial intelligence is a thing. And these 2 graphs are basically 2 different situations that I posed to them. Like, you could think of it as visual and audio processing. And each one of these bars is representing a different type of neuron or structure of neurons working together. And the bars are basically how bad they are. So over there, the bars that did the best were, let's see, basic NN1, basic NN2, and some last NN3. And they did the best on that particular situation. Yet, when we switched the problem just slightly, I added like a curve to it. They're like the worst ones on there. And Viz2 and basic NN3, which are pretty horrible over there, were now performing the best. So why don't we do what the human brain does and continue duplicating in artificial intelligence and pull a whole bunch of neurons specialized in different tasks together? What if ChatGPT 3 had one section designed specifically for language processing, one for auditory processing, one for visual processing? Like, we can give multiple regions of these networks different specialties just like the human brain. Now, yes, it adds a little bit more complexity. You aren't confident which neurons are going to be performing best in different situations. But we can start at least identifying what neurons are good at what things. Now, this graph is also based on like a set duration of training time. So this also means that these are faster at training for this particular pattern. So it should also improve the speed and just overall makeup of the artificial network. Now, this is one method. I have no clue if it's going to work. I'm going to probably try it this summer. We'll see. But the idea that a high school student can come up with something like this, I built my own neural network neurons, completely new ones, experimental, and they performed well. It's right here. It's beating out the other neurons. I did this as a high school student, which is kind of my second point. Artificial neural networks are constantly evolving and changing. They are improving. We can just keep working at them. And the human mind, well, maybe in the next 100,000 years it'll improve, but it's generally pretty static. So I do believe that artificial intelligence will eventually at least be able to generalize and do multiple different types of tasks. It might not reach sapience. Who cares about that though? I just want it to be really good at walking my dog. Now, the human mind and artificial intelligence, they're okay. There's animals, but we all start learning in the same spot. We see where we want to be and where we are currently and try to close that gap. The only difference between our dog and us is that our mind is able to see more complex patterns and is large enough to store the patterns in a stable manner. Thank you.